A lot of you also still have many questions to ask and also curious to understand more about the spiral dynamics. That's why Pastor Justin made this session today so you can go more deeper. And he also mentioned in the beginning that there's more that he want to share in the sermon, but the time was short. So today is a time that we can go more deeper. So I prepare a few topics to discuss with Pastor Justin. I'll ask him a question and he will answer. But during this time also, if you have any question, please type in the chat, and I will also ask them on behalf of all of you. Yeah, so feel free to ask anytime. You can just type on the chat. So let us begin. Okay, we're going deeper with spiral dynamics. Everyone can see my screen, right?
Yes. Yeah, you can see it.
So first thing I'm going to talk about today is how does this spiral dynamics integrate with the divine principle? That's also in our breakout room. Someone also really, a few mentioned that this paradigm looks very similar to what true parents are teaching. One person mentioned it's like looks like the like how true father draw all the chalkboard, everything like that. Back in the day, it's very complicated. And some also mentioned about the 8 stages. So yeah, Pastor, could you share more about this? How does this integrates with the divine principle and true parents teaching?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of I think parallels that we can see from what true parents talk about and divine principle. One point that it talks about in spiral dynamics, which I think is very similar to divine principle, is like how these different stages kind of came to be, or how they developed through time. Like if we look at the different stages, actually there's a diagram that I really like that I'll show you guys. So this diagram, it kind of shows like all these different stages and how we've progressed over time. But another thing that it talks about is how like each of these stages kind of came into existence at a different stage in human the human history, basically. Basically 250,000 years ago was like these survival bands, and basically humanity was just living in this instinctive mode of trying to survive, and their quest was just get food, get water, hunt the woolly mammoth, and kind of survive in this world. And the idea in spiral dynamics is that people basically, the reason why we end up evolving is because of life getting more complex, and kind of environments getting more pressure in the environment. So basically, think about these individual small groups of people kind of scavenging together, hunter-gatherers, and then they eventually start to multiply, and then they start to form like a tribe. And then because there's more people now, they have to actually figure out, okay, how do we coexist as a larger group? And then from here develops like this more tribal mentality and magical thinking, and like chieftains, and there's a little bit of there's a structure of who is, who do we follow? We follow the chieftain, we follow the elders, this group of elders that kind of leads us so that we can survive in this wilderness. And then as things get more, as the human population increases and it gets more populated, eventually we start to need something that's more complex, where it gets into this more like this power ego, this authoritarian kind of thinking. And it keeps progressing over time, eventually gets into where the authoritarian, like, it creates this kind of structure and this clarity of like, okay, we're going to move forward, and there's this warrior spirit, so that when these different tribes are clashing with each other, we don't want to die, so we need to be strong. We need to have this warrior mentality. We need to conquer. It's kind of a kill or be killed kind of mentality. But eventually, that the limitations of that start to become very clear, and people start to want something want something more, or really need something more in order to make things work. And so it starts to become not based off of just one person who is the strongest of the group that makes all decisions, but it kind of transcends that into there is a God. There is a God that has absolute rules and order, and it's no longer in the hands of a physical human being who makes the rules, but it's actually the rules are based on God. And then from there it goes into this orange stage, this rational self, and then the green stage, and then yellow and turquoise. And I don't want to review the whole thing, but one thing that kind of came up for me as like a parallel was the idea in the Divine Principle. It talks about merit of the age, right? So just to kind of go to that section, merit of age is like talking about how does a fallen person go back to that original state that God intended. Basically, how do people grow? Because it's kind of through the fall that we fell into this state that was almost below even like where we started, right? We became like very animalistic in a way, and in some ways you could kind of think about that as like this beige mentality, like we're just like animals just trying to survive, very instinctual. And then it talks about returning, it talks about merit of the age. And it says, first in the history of the providence of resurrection, many of those who were entrusted with a mission, exerted themselves with utmost sincerity and faith to realize the will of heaven. Even though they may not have fully carried out the responsibilities based on their devotion, they broadened the foundation upon which subsequent generations can form a relationship of heart with God. We call this foundation the merit of the age and the providence of restoration. And the merit of the age has increased in proportion to the foundation of heart laid by prophets, sages, and righteous people who came before us. Therefore, resurrection is carried out based on the merit of the age. And basically, the idea is like throughout the different ages, right, there is this deeper relationship of heart with God that becomes possible, right? And so, like if we think about like these different stages, like one way to look at it is like each stage kind of opens up a deeper relationship with God, understanding a part of God that is a little bit more deeper. And it's also interesting because in spiral dynamics, this idea is that at a certain stage, like if humanity reaches a certain stage, like people basically there's like a ceiling to people's level of consciousness, how much they can develop. So like 250,000 years ago, everybody was in this kind of very survivalist, instinctive way of thinking. And no matter, what a person might be like, an individual might be like during that time, there is no way for them to actually transcend that way of thinking, because that was the highest developed form of thinking at that time. And then, this purple way of thinking, this stage was birthed, and then it was like everyone that kind of got unlocked for people. So now people can grow not just in this beige stage, but they can actually grow into this purple stage, and so on and so forth. The red stage, and then the blue stage is kind of like, I see it, that's kind of started with we could say it was like during the time of Moses, like the Ten Commandments was like this blue stage. And it was like before that, people couldn't understand these concepts of like laws that were created by an absolute God, that we had to follow these laws that God created. Like there was no concept of that. So because there was no concept of it, there was no understanding, there was no way that people could actually transcend this red stage of thinking. And it's actually based on the foundation of the people that come before us, like what it says in the Divine Principle, the saints, the sages, the people who, these people who had an elevated thinking from the rest of the people on that stage. It's because of those people that actually humanity was able to transcend into a higher stage and a higher stage. But also like, and we have to remember, like even those sages, right, they were limited to that stage. So like Moses was, he unlocked this blue stage of thinking for the Israelites, the people at that time. But he couldn't transcend that. He wasn't able to go into this more like orange stage thinking, because that was kind of the maximum level of the merit of the age that he could actually get to, was this kind of blue stage of thinking, so to speak. And then it goes on, and my feeling is like, I feel like when we talk about like Jesus, right? Like, what did Jesus bring? I feel like in many ways he brought this kind of unlocking of this, like maybe orange stage thinking, this green stage thinking. I feel like we talk about also in Divine Principle, it talks about these different ages, right? It talks about the first what is it? Province from it. Yeah. So it talks about the age of justification by works, right? So it's like there's this age, and then the people of this era who practiced the law in their daily life were resurrected in spirit to the formation stage, became formed spirits, and yeah, so on and so forth. There's the next one is like justification by faith, and so on and so forth. There's these different kind of ages, and the merit of age increases. So just like one thing to take away from that is like, when we look back at history, we look back on these providential figures, right? It's like one of the reasons why we say like there's nothing like wrong, so to speak, with each of these stages, or it's not bad to be in the stage, is because that is a lot of that is based off of the merit of the age, right? Is like that was the age that people were born in at that time. And so you can't say that they were wrong for thinking that way. It's just that was the age that they're in, right? So anyway, that was one kind of parallel that I thought was kind of interesting. And there's a lot more, but I think I'll pause there.
Oh, thanks. That's very interesting. In my breakout room before, there was a question about how do you think these spiral dynamics relate to the 8 stages that True Father always mentioned? Like spiral dynamics also have 8 stages, right?
Yeah, sorry, can you say that again?
How does this spiral dynamics relates to the 8 stages that True Father always mentioned? 7 and 7. Do you think there's a correlation there? 7 and then
I mean, I do think there's a relation there. I don't know if it's like an exact, stage by stage correlation, but I do just see some like similarities there. I think, like for example, we talk about like servant of servants. It's kind of like you could think of it as like very animalistic, like you're even lower than like an animal, right? It's like this instinctive mentality. And then like the servants, I mean, this one is a little bit harder for me, like to kind of grasp the similarities, but the one that makes a little bit more sense and like the similarities is like the horizontal stages that your parents talks about. Because the horizontal stages is like the individual, the individual, and then it's like the family, and then it's like the tribe. And in spiral dynamics, it talks about like the first 3 stages as like egocentric, right? So it's all about like yourself. So it's interesting, like if you think about like the individual, the family, the tribe, it's very easy to connect that to like yourself in a way, like because you are yourself, the individual is yourself, and then the family is like your blood, they're an extension of yourself, and then the tribe is like an extended extension of yourself, right? So all of that is kind of like in that world of like the egocentric world. And then it talks about in spiral dynamics, the next 2 stages are ethnocentric. So ethnocentric means it deals with like the larger group or the ethnicity, the nation state. Like right here, it says blue is more like monarchies, nation states, whereas orange is like, yeah, democracy. So that's interesting that it kind of parallels with like going from tribes to the race and the nation, right? So that kind of fits there in like the ethnicity, the ethnocentric worldview. And then what is it? Nation, and then what was it? World? What was that? What's next, right? World, right? And then in spiral dynamics also it says green is like world centric, right? So it's thinking about the planet, the world. Um, and then the seventh stage in the horizontal is the cosmos, which is, yellow is systematic. It's thinking about, it's starting to bring in that element of the internal, the external, and all these different systems and putting that all together. And then there's like God, according to the 8 stages, like the last stage is God, right? So maybe that correlates somehow with this more holistic perspective that is very, spiritual in nature and kind of supernatural in many ways. So that's kind of some of the parallels that I saw as far as like the stages.
It's interesting. Seems like it relates more to the horizontal 8 stages than the vertical. But yeah, I see there's a similarity there. And there's a few questions about this topic from the floor. For the magical stage, you mentioned just now, the second stage, you mentioned just now about magical thinking. Could you elaborate more about that? What do you mean by magical thinking for the tribe?
Sure. Right. Yeah. Um, so yeah, just one thing to be clear about is like when I say magical thinking, it doesn't mean like it's not a negative thing to say. It's not like, oh, sometimes we say to people, you have such magical thinking, and it's kind of a derogatory thing to say to somebody, right? But that's not necessarily what it means in spiral dynamics when it says the purple stage has magical thinking. It's more like in the purple stage, something like why do plants grow in the field? Like why does the grain grow? In the purple stage, it's because there is like these spiritual, forces. God is happy, and that's why it started to rain. And that's why the crops grow, and that's why there's, things happen because God is happy. And bad things happen because God is upset. Why is there an earthquake? It's because God is really upset with us, and we have to do our, special, rain dance, or we have to make sacrifices to please the gods. And if we do that, then God will reward us with good outcomes. So that's what it means by magical thinking. It's not saying that thinking is wrong or bad even. It's just saying that it's just categorizing that kind of thinking as magical thinking, whereas, an orange stage thinker would say the crops grow because of you got the right mix of the hydrogens and the nitrogens, and the soils have all the right nutrients. That would be like an orange stage kind of thinking about why things happen. But that's kind of what it means by magical thinking. It's yeah.
All right, hope that answers the question. And Kester here have a very interesting question. Okay, you mentioned that you heard in different podcasts and books discussing about growth in the human conscious. In the very first was I mentioned, right? We are now in the last days, and the human conscious is rising. Where people are understanding a lot of things. The signs of the last days, there's so many signs. And based on that, do you think that it means that based on divine principle, do you think that we are now entering we have officially entered a turquoise ceiling, and most of the world is still getting there?
Right. That's a great question. One thing I'll just say, first of all, just from what I understand about spiral dynamics, and I can give my own thoughts about it. According to spiral dynamics, these different stages it's kind of like 2 tiers. That's the way they look at it, is like the first 6 stages is the first tier, and then
I'm sorry,
second...
Justin,
Yeah.
Could you just repeat the question? I kind of heard only half of it, so you're answering a question I only heard half of. So can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure.
Please.
I'm just going to read it out as it was written. So this question from Kester: I've heard in a few different podcasts / books discussing a growth in the level of human consciousness based on divine principles. Does this mean we have officially entered a turquoise ceiling, and most of the world still getting there? But yeah, so that was the question. So addressing the idea that this is like the ceiling, like this is the top. yeah, according to spiral dynamics, the way they see it as like there are these different tiers, and the way that things kind of grow is like the second tier is like a mirror of the first tier. I don't know if you can see that. You can't see that diagram. Okay, let me turn off the blur so you can actually see it. By the way, this book is Spiral Dynamics. It's the book by Don Beck. If you're interested in learning more, this is kind of more like written in a textbook format, so it's a little hard to understand. But basically, this one is saying like these different tiers. These are the first 6 tiers, and then the second tier is a repeat of the first tier, but in a higher level. So, for example, we talk about like the second tier, the level 7 stage is yellow. The way it talks about that is that is a higher form of the beige tier, which beige is all about your own individual survival and just do whatever it takes to survive. Yellow is actually like the same thing, but on a bigger level of scale of the human race, where it's looking at the survival. It is still thinking about survival, but it's thinking about the survival of the human race and do whatever it takes so that the human race survives. That's why it's so much about competency and functionality, because it really wants the whole human race to survive. And we got to be competent. We got to make the right decisions in order to make that happen. And then the turquoise, according to spiral dynamics, is actually a repeat of the purple. Because if you'll notice, like some of the things that turquoise starts to talk about also sounds like magical thinking in a way, right? It sounds very like woo, like I mentioned, like woo woo, like there's this energy and healing and like all this stuff. It sounds very magical, but it's actually like it is a repeat of purple, but it's at a higher level where it actually understands what we might call magical thinking. It actually understands that there's validity to that, and that there's actually something going on that we don't actually understand. So it's a repeat. So according to spiral dynamics, there is going to be a next stage, which they would call it coral, which is a repeat of red on a higher level. And there's like speculations of what that might look like, but according to spiral dynamics, it's not something that's emerged yet. And so we don't really know what it's going to be like. But it's also like, I don't know. It's pretty theoretical as far as whether or not there's going to be another stage. We don't know, because basically spiral dynamics was discovered through observing what has happened throughout history and what's happening right now. So anything further as far as what goes beyond turquoise, it would be a speculation. But as far as like, have we reached the ceiling and the rest of the world is still getting there? I'm gonna do my best to answer the question, and then if you want to clarify anything that maybe I didn't get the question fully. I would say like basically, yeah, we have reached this point of turquoise right now is the highest stage that exists currently. And according to spiral dynamics, it's only like 0.1% of the population is thinking in this turquoise stage. It's a very, very tiny portion of the human population can think this level. And yeah, basically the rest of humanity is, you could say, playing catch up, or you could say we're still getting there. We're still working up our way up the spiral. Yeah. So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, Casper, did you want to go ahead?
Well, yeah, I think just I mean, in general, I mean, it's interesting to know that there's proposed levels beyond turquoise. But I think it's always a question of like, okay, True Father and True Mother claimed victory, right? We're in the Arab Channel Guk. There's still a lot of stuff in the world. So what is the path? So still a lot of stuff in the world that is wrong. So what does it mean if we have spiritual victory and the road from here where we are now to turquoise and beyond? What does that road look like?
Right. Yeah,
I don't expect you to have a complete answer.
Yeah. I can't say the road's going to look like this. That's for sure. But yeah, what I get from spiral dynamics is just I get a lot of hope, actually, because I feel like we're getting there. That's the sense that I get when I read about spiral dynamics, is that humanity as a whole is collectively rising to a higher level of consciousness, you know. And it's kind of like the carrot has to go out there, and then we can run towards it, you know, like we see something better and then we can run towards it. And that's what I feel like true parents have brought. When we talk about true parents have kind of opened up a new history for humanity, is like they brought something that maybe we couldn't see was possible, but they showed that it's possible to be this way, to have this kind of connection with God, and to live in such a high level of heart and consciousness and thinking and compassion for people, and to do that as a couple. That's like the biggest thing that I feel true parents have done. Like there's a lot of like turquoise thinkers out there and yellow thinkers out there, but I can't think of any of them that have done it as a couple. And where both the husband and the wife have been engaged in that process together. To me, that's like a whole nother level of, yeah, just something that I'm like, wow, I really, you know, that gives me a whole new ideal that I feel I haven't seen in other turquoise level thinkers. Yeah, but yeah, maybe we can go on to the next question.
Oh, okay, another question.
Yes. Next question is from Dominic. Can you explain more about the masculine and feminine natures alternating through the stages that you briefly mentioned in the first message?
Right. Yeah, sure. Right. So I talked about how basically, if you look at the colors, like the colors kind of go back and forth between more warm colors, which is like beige, red, orange, yellow, and more cold colors, purple, blue, green, turquoise. So yeah, basically what it's saying is like the warmer colors are more individualist in nature. They're more about the I, the me, and then the colder colors are more collectivist in nature. They're about the we. And just another interesting point is that the colder colors is a lot where religion develops, because religion is a very kind of collective experience with people most of the time. And so, yeah. And then, I mean, I don't fully understand it, but I do get it. Like, if I just think about it, like, yeah, that does sound a little bit more like on the feminine end, and then that sounds more like on the masculine end. And my sense is that because these different colors they alternate, and because one is more masculine, the other one's more feminine, my sense is that we have a tendency to gravitate more towards the color that, if like we're a man, we have a tendency to gravitate more towards like red or orange or yellow. So we might, of course we have to go through all the stages, but we might be in blue and feel, a strong pull towards orange, but we might not feel as strong of a pull from orange to green. Whereas a woman, more like feminine energy would when they're in orange, they would feel a much stronger pull to the green. My feeling is like this is actually one of the beauties of marriage, and the blessing is actually like bringing these two together, because as you remember from the sermon, I mentioned like the best way that we can grow through these stages is actually by loving people in these different stages. And I think a lot of times it turns out like the wife is more like in the green stage, or the wife is more in the blue stage, and the husband might be more in the red stage or more in the orange stage. But it's through like relating to each other and loving each other that they can actually transcend and go into the next stage through that relationship together. Another thought just about that is like, we think about, I feel originally, I think I'm just kind of, this is just my theory, is like originally, if the fall didn't happen, we were originally supposed to be able to go through these first 6 stages. And in the context of the family. And I feel like that's the key, is that like these stages though some of them might seem like bad, or like, oh, at that stage, you could really see there's a lot of like negative outcomes to like that red stage. But if it happens in the context of a family, I feel it's just a natural development of people. And a lot of those excesses that we see in like red or blue or orange or green would be kind of minimized because there is the wisdom of parents. And my kind of thinking is like, originally we probably should have we probably would have gotten to like the bluish, like the top of the blue stage, and then maybe we'd get married, and from there like women might have been at the green stage and the man might have been the orange stage, and then through kind of loving each other they could transcend into like a yellow stage. And in my mind, like the yellow and the turquoise thinking is a very like parental view, because it looks at all the stages, and it could see the value of all the stages. It's not, it wants all the stages to get along, and it tries to create the environment so that they can all actually thrive and work together. So anyway, those are just some thoughts that came up for me. I don't know if I answered the question, but I think it is very interesting how, yeah, these different stages go back and forth, and how I feel like that's actually an important part of why, yeah, is like these different parts of God relating to each other, and that's what actually creates the growth of our spirit, is when the masculine and feminine can come together. Yeah.
Yes.
You want to go to the next question, Max?
Yes. Next question is about the restoration through indemnity. As we learn through the divine principle, we need foundation of faith, foundation of substance, and then through that we can receive the Messiah and form the foundation of Messiah to receive Messiah and receive and be restored, right? So for the goal of human development should include the goal of restoration. How can we integrate the concept of restoration through indemnity with spiral dynamic based on the stages of development? Or how do you see this?
Yeah, that's a great question. My understanding of kind of restoration through indemnity is like, indemnity is about like restoring our fallen nature, like overcoming our fallen nature, right? And I feel that fits very well with how we grow through the different stages, is actually because the thing that gets us stuck more than anything that I see is the four fallen natures, is that we're not seeing through God's perspective. We can't see the whole picture, right? We cannot see that there is something higher above us. We think that our stage is the right stage and all the other stages are wrong. And we end up fighting and you know, think about like the Cain-Abel dynamic. Abel would be like somebody who's maybe a little bit ahead of you on the stages, right? And we're a little bit lower. And because of our fallen nature, we often look at that Abel and we would say that Abel is wrong. There's something wrong with this person. They are totally off base, and we judge and we end up killing our Abel, right? Because they're a little bit above and they think totally different from us because they're in a different stage. But actually, you know, through this course of the principle actually gives us a roadmap of how we can grow through the stages by relating with an Abel, by restoring that fallen nature through that foundation of faith, foundation of substance. I mean, the second fallen nature, what was it? Reversal of dominion. Is that the second one, or is that the third one? Reversal of dominion, you know, that's the second one. That's the second one. That's the third one. Okay. Leaving your proper position, right? That's the second one. You know, that's another one. It's like, we have to be able to be in that proper position of, you know, Cain and Abel, and relate well together to go up to the next stage, and reversal of dominion, right? We want to have that proper dominion where, I mean, there's many things to that. You know, there's also like the internal being dominion over the external and things like that. But I think also a big one is actually that number 4, is that the multiplication of evil is a big one that keeps us all stuck. Because the multiplication of evil is basically when we take all that stuff that we think about how bad the different stages are, and we start to spread that as gossip and as rumors, and we start to create media empires that are all about talking about how bad the stage is, the next stage is, or the stage below us is, and we have all these conversations with each other about how wrong everybody else around us is. And that's actually, to me, that's a multiplication of evil. That's multiplication of our fallen natures. We're encouraging each other to have fallen mindset and thinking, actually. Yeah, so overcoming all of that, I think that is the course of indemnity, and that is how we can go from the stage we're in to the next stage, and so on and so forth. So yeah, great question. That's definitely something that I thought about quite a bit. Max, if it's okay, I want to go to the last points because we only have a little bit of time, and those were some things that I really wanted to cover.
Okay, sure. So the last part, we will jump straight ahead. So just now we discussed mostly is on theory, right? But how about some practical application that we can use in our daily life?
Right. Yeah, I wanted to get to this because, yeah, this is stuff that we can actually use in our daily life, and also in how we look at our community as a whole. Because I think through spiral dynamics, we can really understand why there are these kind of generational cultural gaps that we find in our community. Like, why is it sometimes so hard for, I mean, we're all unificationists, so I can use this language. Why is it so hard sometimes for first generation to understand second generation, and for second generation to understand first generation? Why does it feel sometimes like there's this big gap between the way that we're communicating with each other, and we get frustrated with each other, and there's this conflict, right? And one of the things that we can learn about through spiral dynamics, actually, this came up as a question. Somebody sent in a question via email where they mentioned that second generation really don't like this idea of absolute truth. And why do second gen get triggered by the idea of absolute truth? And this person sent in the email, I think, as a personal experience that talk about divine principle or true parents' words being the absolute truth, and the second generation say, like, how can you say that? How can you say this is the absolute truth? Like, what about all the other truths out there? What about all the other religions out there? And one way to think about it, like, we often think about it as like, oh, this is a first gen, second gen conflict, or somebody's wrong. Like, the first gen are wrong, or second gen are wrong. Somebody's wrong, right? Like, that's a lot of the times we just think about it as somebody's wrong in this situation. Somebody's thinking is wrong, and we have to change our second generation's thinking, or we have to change our first generation's thinking. But actually, when we look at spiral dynamics, what we can see is actually we're communicating from different stages. And I'm not saying that just because you communicate from the stage that you are in that stage. We have to also remember that depending on the different areas of life, like, we might be a stage blue in our spirituality or our religiosity, but we're a stage green in our career, or we're a stage orange in our relationship. Again, it's all different, but the way that we communicate is very important, because I think a lot of our second generation think about spirituality and religion from a much more stage orange and a stage green mentality. And we talk about it in a stage orange and green mentality. So if second gen get together, well, we might talk about, if it's like a more stronger orange stage second gen with another strong stage or second gen, we'll actually be talking about divine principle, but we'll be talking about it in a very different way. We'll be talking about how practical it is, and how applicable it is to our life, and how it allows us to achieve, great things, and this and that. A green stage might talk about something like, how we can understand ourselves, or blah, blah, blah. But it's like, when talking to a second generation who might be more green stage in their thinking, and you say something like, this is the absolute truth, we have to understand, how does a green stage person translate those words through their lens, through their stage that they're in? When they hear absolute truth, what they're hearing is that you're putting yourself in a hierarchy. And the thing about green stage is they don't like hierarchies. That's one of the things I mentioned. They really don't like hierarchies, because the biggest values of the green stage is equality and equity, and everybody's equal. Everyone has equal value, and how dare you say that some people are better than other people? That is the green stage mentality. And so when you say something like, this is the absolute truth, what they hear, though you might be saying, this is the truth. I really believe this is the truth. But what they're hearing is, you think every other truth is wrong and bad, and you're putting yourself at the top of a hierarchy, and you're putting all the other religions lower on that hierarchy. And I don't like that, because I think we're all equal, and we should, and everyone has a valid opinion, everyone has a valid thing to say, and we should just listen to everybody. So that's why they'll often get triggered by that, right? And then at the same time, blue might get triggered by what that green is saying, you know, what do you mean everyone? Like, there is a hierarchy. This is the absolute truth, you know. All that other stuff is not true, is not right. But it's important how we talk about things, because one of the things that it also says in the principle that I really love is it's in the introduction, or is it maybe chapter 1? I'm just going to read this really quick. It says, it may be displeasing to religious believers, especially to Christians, to learn that a new expression of truth must appear. They believe that the scriptures they have are already perfect and flawless. Certainly, truth itself is unique, eternal, immutable, and absolute. Scriptures, however, are not the truth itself, but are textbooks teaching the truth. They were given at various times in history as humankind developed both spiritually and intellectually. The depth and extent of teachings and the method of expressing the truth naturally varied according to each age. Consequently, we never regard such textbooks as absolute in every detail. So basically what I understand from here is, like, there is an absolute truth, right? There is a truth, but then there's everything that we use to describe that truth, right? Which is like the Bible is trying to describe this truth, but it's not the truth itself. It's trying to describe the truth, right? It's a signpost that is pointing us to this truth. And then the Quran does the same thing. It points us to this truth. And there's all these books and all these words, but actually the truth, I think this is what like a turquoise stage might say, is that the truth goes beyond words. Like, you cannot, it's something that you have to experience in the present. It's an embodied experience that you can only experience it. It goes beyond words. You cannot describe it fully to the full extent of what the truth is. And therefore all expressions of truth are simply that, expressions of truth. They are not the absolute truth itself. So when, you know, sometimes we might act like this is the absolute truth. This book is the absolute truth. And, you know, we might react against that because we feel, oh, well, is that? I don't know. But again, it's just that the stages, the blue stage kind of has to think that these words are the absolute truth. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way the blue stage has to kind of figure things out so that it can have a clear structure and order and discipline for their life so that they can eventually transcend. So, and there's nothing wrong with any of these ways of thinking. But what's important is that we understand that our children, they might be at a different stage than we're at, or they might communicate at a different stage that we're at. And we have to learn how to communicate, not the way that we communicate. We might naturally want to communicate, but if we could learn how to communicate at the stage that they're at, we can have so much deeper kind of unity, because the reality is, like, the principle is amazing. And you can talk about the principle in so many different ways. In a blue fashion, you could talk about how this is the absolute truth. We must believe this because true parents are the Messiah. You know, that's like a blue way of talking about divine principle. An orange stage of talking about divine principle would be, again, it's effective. It's the most systematic way of thinking about spirituality and God. And then, you know, green will talk about it a different way, and yellow and turquoise and so on and so forth. We can all talk about divine principle and love divine principle, but we have to learn how to talk about it at different stages. And I feel if we could do that, we can really attract our second gen back, who are, because I feel a lot of the reason why second gen got so disinterested in our church is because, not because there's anything wrong with our church, so to speak, but the way that we talked about our church, the way that we talked about our teachings, the way that we talked about true parents was very much stuck in this blue stage of communication, talking about true parents as the Messiah, as this being the absolute truth, and everyone, and you know, if you have to believe this because this is the truth, you know, because the Messiah gave this to us, and therefore it is the truth. You know, we kept using that language, and I feel there's a lot of second gen. You know, I mean, if you talk to second gen who kind of are distant, but a lot of them don't hate the church or don't even hate the principle. They just are not interested in the way that we talk about things. It just doesn't resonate for them. So Another thing to just say is on a more like macro level with our movement is like answering the question of why we haven't grown like in the past, 30, 40 years. Is again, I think it comes back to this, is that we've because the thing is like, it also talks about in spiral dynamics that civilizations are kind of growing through the ages, through the stages, right? And I'll talk about America starting off as a very blue stage country, but it's kind of, American culture has been evolving into more like a blue, orange, and green culture. And you'll see, like, that's the way that a lot of the millennials and beyond generation talk, is in a very green stage language, right? And so I feel if we really want to succeed in our movement, which, I really want to do, I really want to succeed, we have to learn how to communicate our principles, our teachings to these stages, because we keep trying to witness to people using a blue stage of languaging and communicating, and it's not interesting to most young people to talk about things that way. They're kind of like, I was never looking for the Messiah. Why are you talking about the Messiah? They're not looking for that, but they might be looking for something that is practical, that is rational, that is scientific, or they might be looking for something that is going to allow them to help all of the people of the world, find their inner peace and find God and find this deep, loving relationship with God. They might be looking for that. And so anyway, this is all things that I would love to, take more time to talk about and share about. And but yeah, that's kind of my thinking moving forward, is I really want to think about these things as we, even like the sermons that I give, I kind of feel like I want to go more into like orange style of sermons, because I feel that's where a lot of our young people are at, or green type of communication with the sermons, because I feel like that's where a lot of the young people are at, and I want to attract them to the principle. I want to attract them to true parents. And yeah, anyway, I think many people might have already noticed that, yeah, it might sound different. The language that I use might be different from the way that past leaders or pastors or of our unification movement have used different language than I have. Like, I don't talk about true parents as the Messiah in the sermons. I don't talk about it being the absolute truth. I talk about being perspectives and being useful for your lives, that you can use this, because my understanding is that that's where America is at. And the goal is all the same. The goal is bring people up higher up the mountain, bring them closer to God, bring them closer to God's truth, closer to God's heart. And we do have to be strategic in how we do that. And I think spiral dynamics gives us a really big picture of how we can be strategic and systematic in the way that we do things and our methods. Anyway, that's it. It's 9 o'clock. There's still so much more I could have talked about, but that's going to be it for tonight. So we have to do a part 2, but yeah. Anyway, how was that for you guys? Was that interesting? Was that worthwhile? Was it worth being here for this past hour?
Yeah, no, it was
very good.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Your opinion doesn't.
Do you want a one word comment from each?
Sure. One word comment.
I don't know. I don't know if I can do it one word. No. Good, great, but
Cool.
what's interesting is this whole thing of growing levels, and that like completion. Or even before we use the word completion, we used to use perfection, and it's a very loaded word, and we think that's the end. But actually, this is what blows my mind, is that the blue or the turquoise is just the beginning, not the end. And that actually Father encompasses it all. When Father ate a good meal, he was really there, 100%. He ate that meal. When he laughed like nobody's business, So he was embodiment of all those stages, of all those levels. It's not that not that you are in, I'm in the higher stage, so I don't have to be in the lower stage. No, we are in all those stages at the same time. That's what I get out of it, really. Thank you.
Amen. Adieu. Thank you for that. All right. Yeah, maybe we can. Oh yeah, Chris. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I just really love that point about you wanting to speak in the language and the of the listener. You know, any teacher will know they got to speak in using the language appropriate to that grade level. You know, so they can get it. You know, so I mean, that point is perfect. I love that point. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So yeah, maybe we can call it a night here. Thank you all so much. This was a lot of fun for me. Hope you guys had a good time. God bless.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
Great.
next
Thank you,
time.
Justin.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank you, Max.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Nice to see you,
Bye.
Mr. McKay.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.